My general question is, and I've asked people in various countries, not in a hostile way, but in terms of transparency, my question is twofold. What about this whole world do you want to keep, and what do you want to get rid of? And if you don't give any answers, either you haven't thought about it at all, which is kind of unlikely, but if you want to just give more rhetoric, I start to think, I'm not really digging this. And some of it is, I'm not saying all of it, but some of it is leftists not wanting to reveal that, yes, they do like an industrialized world and globalized uniform world and factories and everything else. They don't want to say that because it doesn't fly much anymore. It doesn't fly with kids, especially young anarchists. I'd say especially it doesn't. So you're not really, quote, primitivist, so you don't say that either. So you bump up the rhetoric, and I'm not saying that's all there is to it, but you've got a question thing. And I'm not demanding some party line answer, but I'm trying to get, what is it really about? Insurrection for what? What kind of world do you want? Any opinion you want or desire? I'm listening. Anyway, not to beat that into the ground here. Another thing, one way to maybe bring this into focus too, is one of the responses, I think, from classical anarchism is that this anti-civilization, green anarchy, whatever you call it, stuff, we don't like it, it's kind of kooky, and maybe more importantly, it isn't necessary because it's covered already in the anarchist point of view, which we, for the sake of argument, reduce to two slogans, and we know what they are: smash the state, abolish capitalism. Okay, that sounds persuasive, I guess. You do that, and then everything is covered. You do have a liberated world. You do have a totally different idea of people. Except, given that the classical anarchists want to keep all this, want to keep the technology, the industry, the massified world, and all that, and they do, or they be primitivists or something, I guess. Check it out. How do you abolish the state and keep all this? You simply can't. Because if you didn't have all the regulation and coordination and statutes, if you didn't have a huge involvement of government and the state, the whole complex society would start going off the rails within hours. To turn it around, there is a way to abolish the state, and that involves getting rid of complex society, mass society. I contend that's the only way to do it. And similarly, I think, I put this out anyway, abolish capitalism. Yeah, we all want to abolish capitalism. And the classical anarchists, way back when, of course, on down. But when you think about that, you kind of have the same problem, because if you want to keep complex society going and there's no capitalism, you have practical problems. For example, if you get rid of the commodity and wage labor, the price tag and the paycheck, great goal, great worthy goal, but so that means what? It means people don't get paid, or who pays them, or who doesn't pay them, or there's no money, or you know what I mean? You're trying to think of how it would work. It doesn't work in complex society. This is not an argument for capitalism, but capitalism works well that way. In fact, really, I think you have to come down to the fact that complex society is capitalism. It's not just a political management problem or veneer. And so I think, again, you have to say that you've got to get rid of the complex society, or you can't get rid of capitalism. And there is at least there's a counter argument. Paracon, you probably heard of that, participatory economics. The idea is that workers would decide on production and consumption. You still have mass society, but you could run it that way. You could have direct self-management. But the thing that strikes me is then you have millions of meetings, you have people not only working, but then having to go to all these meetings. And how would you coordinate these millions of meetings without a gigantic bureaucracy? It just is too clunky. I don't think you could make a really good case for that, quite frankly. Well, I want to just get to technology primarily here. And I want to illustrate this Sherry Turkle came to Eugene, came to the university there, gave a very powerful speech a year or two ago. She's at MIT. The latest technological stuff and psychology, her fields, her twin fields. And she gave a talk about what the technoculture changes it's bringing, the special attention to the youth, and particular attention to her 13-year-old daughter. She was saying how it's really deforming and redefining life. In fact, she even said that she's not sure her daughter grasps the difference between life and machine. That's getting blurred. And she was very troubled by that. And, there's been a lot written on this. It was a really moving talk. It was tremendously moving because it was just a non-stop litany and discussion of how profound this is, how much it's remaking everything, and how fast it's doing that. I think everybody there was very inspired. At the very end, she just kind of smiled and said, "Well, that's modernity," and sat down. It was just so stunning. It was just absolutely stunning. And the Q&A started right there. So I jumped up and I said, "Wait, if not to abolish it." And there seems to me a huge amount of intellectual and ethical bankruptcy to spell this out for us and then just say, "Oh well, just wait a minute." And I actually think, not by my oratory or anything like that, but really could have heard a pin drop. I think that lots of other people are thinking exactly the same thing. That's not good enough. You can't just let it go, let it keep racing ahead further and further. You can measure this in a million ways. I'm just going to bring out a couple of examples. I've got 50, you probably have that many yourself, of how this works, how in practice it's going on. Oxford University every couple of years or so puts out a junior dictionary for young students. Not surprisingly, new words were Twitter and BlackBerry and stuff like that. No surprise, and of course those words should be in there. They're common usage, they're common practice. So, the chilling, I'd say, are the words that were removed. Oak, sycamore, otter, beaver, various names of trees and flowers and so forth. Taking those words out, they're still around. I'm not saying that completes the task, but you can see where it goes. And once you proceed down that path, you have a hard time even conceptualizing nature if the words aren't there. That's kind of obvious. So this is just a marker of how much is being carried away, how much is being made to disappear as the technology displaces more and more. Another one, just from just a couple of days ago, I saw this in the New York Times. The iPhones have all these applications. There's a million apps. You can look at your business page every day, and it'll do something else for you as you lose the skills to do it without the machine. Of course, that's the point. But that's the point with all. That's the point with you punch in the address, it tells you where to turn. You don't have a sense of directions. You certainly couldn't read a map anymore. I mean, that's the direction. I'm not saying people are totally stupid now because of it, but it's going that way. Well, this new app they're talking about is the Baby Cry app. And people have these systems where your infant's in another room and you can hear if the baby's crying or something. Cool, that's fine. But the Baby Cry app interprets the sound, the cries or whatever, the noise that the child is making. So that's just amazing. Whatever happens to parents, their instinctual connection with their child, you know what it means. You don't have to have a fucking machine tell you that means the baby is or whatever. But it isn't science fiction. These things are just rushing onward.